A battle-hardened soldier returns home, buying an abandoned ranch for just $1 only to hear a little girl inside call him Dad. He's never seen her before. As he unravels the truth about her past, a web of lies, a stolen will, and a ruthless guardian emerges. In a courtroom showdown, he fights for custody, uncovering secrets that will change both their lives forever in a story of truth, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. The government called it urban renewal. Ethan called it fate. That dollar bill he traded for 40 acres of dust and memories? Well, turned out he got more than land. See, when them keys turned in that rusted lock for the first time, the first thing he heard wasn't creaking wood or settling foundations. It was a little voice from somewhere in the dark saying, "Daddy?" And that's when a soldier who'd faced Taliban fire in the mountains of Afghanistan learned what real fear tasted like. Now Ethan had been back from his third deployment for exactly 93 days when he saw that auction notice tacked to the bulletin board outside Murphy's General Store, 40 acres of scrubland outside Millfield, Montana, complete with a 2-story ranch house that had seen better decades. Starting bid, $1. Most folks would have driven right past that kind of offer, figuring there had to be a catch. But Ethan wasn't most folks. 3 tours in a war zone teaches you to see opportunity where others see wreckage. The county clerk, a woman named Gladys with fingers stained yellow from cigarettes and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, slid the deed across her desk like she was dealing a poker hand. "You're the 3rd owner this year, soldier," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. But he signed anyway, because a man who'd slept in mud and blood for 18 months wasn't about to be spooked by a clerk's attitude. The drive out to the property took him through country that looked like God had started painting it and then walked away. Rolling hills the color of wheat stubble stretched to mountains that cut the sky like broken teeth. The kind of beautiful that makes you understand why men fight wars over dirt. The ranch house sat at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen a grader in years, surrounded by fence posts that leaned like old men telling secrets. Ethan parked his pickup next to what had once been a flower garden and was now just thorns and memories. The front porch sagged under the weight of too many winters, and the windows stared out at nothing like dead eyes. But it was solid. It was his. And after 3 deployments of calling other men's land home, that meant something. He climbed the porch steps, each one groaning a protest under his boots, and fitted the key into a lock that fought him like it didn't want to give up its secrets. The door swung open on hinges that screamed, and Ethan stepped into his new life. That's when he heard it. Clear as a bell, soft as a prayer, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. "Daddy?" Now Ethan Callahan had been shot at by experts and lived to tell about it. He'd pulled wounded men from burning vehicles and walked through minefields that could turn a man into pink mist. But hearing that word, in that voice, in that empty house, froze him solid as January ground. "Hello?" He called out, his voice echoing off bare walls. Silence. Then, like a ghost learning to breathe, footsteps. Small ones. Coming down what sounded like stairs. She appeared at the bottom of the staircase like something out of a fever dream. Maybe 6 years old, wearing a nightgown that had been white once, but was now the color of old snow. Hair the color of wheat hanging in tangles around. A face so thin you could see the skull beneath. But it was her eyes that stopped Ethan's heart. Blue as Montana sky and holding recognition that shouldn't have been there. "You came back," she whispered, and took a step toward him. Ethan's training kicked in. Assess the situation. Identify threats. Protect civilians. This was a civilian, a child. In his house, alone. "Sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice gentle like he was approaching a wounded animal. "What's your name?" "Lily." She took another step. "Mommy said you'd come home." "Where's your mommy, Lily?" The little girl's face crumpled like old paper. "She went to sleep. She won't wake up. The house suddenly felt colder. Ethan knelt down, bringing himself to her level. When did she go to sleep, honey? Lily held up fingers, showed him scratches on the wall behind her. Marks, counting marks, hundreds of them. I've been waiting 374 days, she said. 374 days. Over a year. This child had been alone in this house for over a year. Ethan's mind raced. He thought about the county clerk's smirk, the third owner this year, the dollar auction. Nobody sells 40 acres of Montana ranch land for $1 unless there's something wrong with it. Something like a dead woman and a living child nobody wanted to claim. Lily, he said carefully, show me where your mommy is. She took his hand. Her fingers were tiny ice cubes in his palm. She led him through a kitchen where empty cans lined the counter like soldiers, through a living room where blankets made a nest on the floor, upstairs that groaned under their combined weight. The hallway smelled like lavender and something else. Something medical. Something dying. The bedroom door stood open. Inside, on a bed that hadn't been slept in for months, lay what remained of a woman. She'd been beautiful once, you could tell. Blonde hair like lilies spread across a pillow like spilled sunlight. The smell was bad, but not as bad as it should have been. Montana winter had preserved what Montana heat would have destroyed. On the nightstand next to the bed, pill bottles. Lots of them. Morphine, OxyContin, names that Ethan recognized from military hospitals. Pain medication. The kind they gave to people who were dying hard. Mommy was sick, Lily said from behind him. Aunt Mara gave her medicine, but it didn't help. Aunt Mara. Ethan filed that name away. Lily, honey, do you have any pictures of your mommy? From when she was, before she got sick? Lily nodded and disappeared into another room. When she came back, she was carrying a photo album bound in pink leather. The first page made Ethan's blood freeze. There he was, in his dress uniform, standing next to the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, Carolyn Hendricks. The woman he'd loved and left behind when he'd shipped out for his first deployment 5 years ago. The woman who'd stopped writing after 6 months. The woman who'd broken his heart with silence. That's you, Lily said, pointing at the photo. That's Daddy. Ethan stared at the picture, at Caroline's smile, at her hand resting on a belly that showed the first signs of pregnancy. A pregnancy he'd never known about. When was this taken, Lily? Before I was born. Mommy said you had to go fight the bad men. She said you'd come back when I was big enough. 5 years ago. The math worked. The timing worked. Everything worked. Except for one crucial detail. Caroline had never told him. Never wrote to him about a baby. Never gave him the chance to choose. Lily, did your mommy have any papers? Important papers? In the box. Under her bed. She said not to touch, but... Lily's voice trailed off. Under the bed was a metal lockbox. Inside, Ethan found what he was looking for. Birth certificate. Father, unknown. But there was more. Letters. His letters. The ones he'd written to Carolyn during those first 6 months before she'd stopped responding. Letters asking about her health, about her life, about their future. Letters that had gone unanswered. And then he found the other letters, the ones she'd written but never sent. Dozens of them, addressed to him at his forward operating base. Letters that told the story she'd never had the courage to mail. Ethan, the first one began, I'm pregnant. I know this isn't what we planned, but I'm scared and I need you to know. I need you to choose. Choose us. Letter after letter, chronicling her pregnancy, Lily's birth, her first words, first steps, all the moments he'd missed. All the moments. Caroline had lived alone. The last letter was dated 3 years ago. I'm sick, Ethan. Really sick. The doctors say cancer. They say I have maybe a year. Mara is helping me, but I don't trust her. She keeps talking about Lily's future, about who Would take care of her if something happened to me. I think she wants to adopt her. I think she wants the ranch. I don't know who else to turn to. If something happens to me, please find our daughter. Please take care of her. Please forgive me for not telling you sooner." Ethan sat on the floor of that dead woman's bedroom and cried. Cried for Caroline. Cried for Lily. Cried for himself and the 3 years he'd lost. Cried for the war that had kept him from knowing his daughter existed. "Don't cry, Daddy," Lily said, crawling into his lap. "Mommy said brave soldiers don't cry." "Sometimes they do, baby girl," Ethan whispered into her hair. "Sometimes they do." That night, after he'd called the sheriff and the coroner and started the machinery of official death in motion, Ethan sat with Lily on the front porch and watched the stars come out. She'd found a music box in her mother's room, an old thing that played "You Are My Sunshine" in a tinny, broken melody. "Mommy used to sing that to me," Lily said. "She sang it to me too," Ethan replied, "before I went away." "Are you going away again?" Ethan looked down at this little girl who was his daughter, this miracle he'd never known existed, and made the first promise he'd ever been sure he could keep. "No, baby, I'm never going away again." But promises, even the ones we mean with all our hearts, are fragile things. And sometimes the war follows you home. The sheriff who responded to Ethan's call was a man named Tom Bradley, with a belly that spoke of too many diner dinners and eyes that had seen enough of small-town tragedy to recognize it on sight. He took one look at Caroline's body, at the pill bottles, at Lily clutching her music box, and shook his head like he was disappointed, but not surprised. "Carolyn Hendricks," he said. "Hell of a thing. We all knew she was sick, but nobody figured she was this bad off." "How long has she been dead?" Ethan asked. "Coroner will have to say for sure, but in this cold, could be months. That little girl's been living on canned goods and rainwater, looks like." Bradley made his report. "Natural death," he said. "Cancer. Patient with access to pain medication. These things happened. Tragic, but not criminal. The state would take custody of Lily until relatives could be found or suitable placement arranged." That's when Ethan showed him the birth certificate. The letters, the photos. "Well, I'll be damned," Bradley said. "You're the father? Looks that way. Can you prove it?" "DNA test." Bradley nodded. "That'll take time. Couple weeks, maybe. Until then, the girl goes into foster care." No, the word came out harder than Ethan intended. "She stays with me." "Son, I understand you want to help, but you can't just claim a child. She's my daughter." "Maybe, but until that's proven, she's a ward of the state." Ethan looked at Lily, who was watching this conversation with eyes too old for her face. She'd already lost her mother. He wasn't about to let her lose him too. "What if I was family?" Ethan asked. "What if someone who was already related came forward? Blood relative? That'd be different. But you said the father was unknown." "What? About the mother's family?" Bradley consulted his notes. "Says here she has a sister, Mara Hendricks, lives in town. Runs the pharmacy. Aunt Mara, the woman who'd been giving Caroline medicine. The woman Caroline had feared wanted to adopt Lily. Where's this sister been while the kid was starving?" "That's a fair question," Bradley admitted. "Tell you what, let me give her a call. See what she has to say." What Mara Hendricks had to say arrived an hour later in the form of a black sedan. And a woman who looked like Carolyn might have looked if life had drained all the warmth out of her. Same bone structure, same blonde hair, but where Caroline had been soft, Mara was sharp. Where Caroline had been kind, Mara was calculating. She took one look at Lily and burst into tears that seemed genuine enough. "Oh, sweetie," she said, dropping to her knees. "I've been looking everywhere for you." But Lily shrank back, pressing herself against Ethan's legs. "I don't want to go with Aunt Mara," she whispered. "Looking everywhere?" Ethan asked. "The kids. Been in this house for over a year. Mara's tears dried up fast. She stood, brushing dust off her slacks, and fixed Ethan with a stare that could freeze water. "And you are? Ethan Callahan. Ah." Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition? Fear? Carolyn mentioned you. The soldier she used to date. The soldier she was engaged to. The father of her child. Mara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Father?" "Mr. Callahan, I hate to break it to you, but Caroline had many gentlemen friends after you deployed. Lily could be anyone's daughter." Lily made a small sound of distress. "Is that so?" Ethan kept his voice level. "Then why does she have my dog?" "Tags?" He pulled them from his pocket. The ones he'd found in Caroline's lockbox. The ones she'd kept all these years. Mara's composure cracked just for a second. "That doesn't prove anything. DNA test will. Until then, Lily comes home with me. I'm her legal guardian." "Since when?" Mara produced a document from her purse. Legal guardianship papers, signed by Carolyn Hendricks 3 months before her death. "Caroline was very sick at the end," Mara said. "She wanted to make sure Lily was taken care of." Ethan read the papers. They looked legitimate. They gave Mara full custody of Lily and control of Caroline's estate, including the ranch. "This is dated after she stopped responding to treatment." Ethan said, "Was she competent to sign this?" "Are you questioning my sister's mental state?" "I'm questioning yours." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all take a step back here, Mr. Callahan. You've got a claim that needs proving. Ms. Hendricks, you've got documentation. Until we sort this out, I'm going to have to place Lily in temporary state custody." "No," Lily's voice cut through the adult conversation like a knife. "I want to stay with Daddy." "Sweetie," Mara said, her voice honey over broken glass, "this man isn't your daddy. He's just confused." "He is. Mommy showed me pictures. Pictures can lie, honey. People lie too." Lily looked up at Ethan with eyes full of terror. "You won't. Let them take me, will you, Daddy?" Before Ethan could answer, Mara was moving. She grabbed Lily's arm, not gently, and started pulling her toward the door. "Come along, Lily. We have a lot to talk about." That's when Lily did something that changed everything. She bit Mara's hand, hard enough to draw blood. Hard enough to make Mara scream and let go. "She tastes like the medicine." Lily cried, "The medicine that made Mommy sleep." Mara stared at the bite mark on her hand, at the blood, at Lily. "You little monster," she whispered. And Ethan saw it then, in Mara's eyes. Not love. Not concern for a bereaved niece. Something else. Something cold and calculating and utterly without conscience. "Sheriff," Ethan said quietly, "I think you need to take a closer look at how Caroline Hendricks died. What they found in Caroline's medicine cabinet changed everything. Bottles and bottles of morphine, OxyContin, fentanyl. Enough to kill a horse. Enough to kill a woman slowly, over months, while someone watched and waited and counted the days until a will could be probated and property transferred. What they found in Mara's pharmacy records was even more interesting. Prescriptions written in Caroline's name. Prescriptions filled weeks after Caroline's death. Medicine that had gone somewhere, to someone, for some purpose that had nothing to do with healing. What they found in the root cellar under the old oak tree behind the house was the final piece of the puzzle. A metal box buried 3 feet down, wrapped in plastic, containing the real will. Caroline's will. The one that left everything to her daughter Lily, with Ethan Callahan named as guardian in the event of Caroline's death. The one that had been replaced by a forgery giving Mara everything. But the most damning evidence was what they found in Caroline's hair. Traces of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent. The kind used in hospitals to immobilize patients during surgery. The kind that would keep someone conscious and aware while they slowly suffocated. Caroline hadn't died of cancer. She'd been murdered. Slowly, methodically, by someone who'd had access to her medication, her food, her trust. By someone who'd wanted a little girl to inherit 40 acres of Montana ranch land. By someone who'd planned to be that little girl's guardian. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Ethan sat in the gallery every day, Lily beside him, holding his hand while prosecutor laid out a case of premeditated murder, inheritance fraud, and child abandonment. Mara Hendricks, they proved, had been slowly poisoning her sister for months, while forging documents and stealing medication. She'd left Lily alone in that house to starve, checking on her just often enough to make sure she stayed alive. A living heir was worth more than a dead one. The jury took 4 hours to convict on all counts. But the real victory came earlier, when the DNA results confirmed what Ethan's heart had known from the moment he'd looked into Lily's eyes. She was his daughter, his blood, his responsibility, his joy. 6 months later, they stood in the same courtroom for a different kind of proceeding. Judge Catherine Morrison, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled down at them from the bench. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "are you prepared to accept full custody and responsibility for Lily Caroline Callahan?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Lily, do you understand that Mr. Callahan wants to be your daddy forever?" Lily nodded solemnly. "He already is my daddy. He just didn't know it yet." Judge Morrison's smile widened. "Then by the power vested in me by the State of Montana, I hereby grant full custody of this child to her biological father, Ethan James Callahan. Congratulations, you two. You're officially a family." That night, they sat on the front porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set over land that belonged to them now. Really belonged to them. Ethan had used his military back pay and savings to fix the place up. New roof, new paint, new windows that didn't stare out at the world like dead eyes. Lily had planted a garden where her mother's flowers had once grown. Carrots and tomatoes and sunflowers that turned their faces toward the light. "Daddy," Lily said, curled up in his lap, "do you think Mommy can see us?" Ethan looked up at the stars, at the vast Montana sky that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. "I think she can, baby girl. I think she knows we're okay." "Do you think she's sorry she didn't tell you about me?" It was a hard question, the kind that didn't have easy answers. "I think your mommy did the best she could with what she had," Ethan said finally. "Sometimes people make mistakes, even when they love someone very much. Like when you went away to war? Yeah, like that. But you came back. I came back. And you're never leaving again?" "Never again, Lily. This is home now. We're home now." She fell asleep in his arms, her breathing soft and steady against his chest. Ethan sat there long into the night, holding his daughter, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Owls calling, coyotes singing, the wind through grass that would grow tall and green come spring. He thought about Carolyn, about the woman he'd loved and lost and found again in their daughter's eyes. He thought about the war, about the men he'd served with, about the battles, fought on foreign soil for reasons that seemed less important now than they once had. He thought about coming home, about what that really meant. It wasn't a place, he realized. It wasn't even a person. It was a choice, the choice to stay, the choice to build something lasting, the choice to plant seeds and tend them and watch them grow, the choice to be there when someone needed you to be there. A year later, on a warm spring morning, Lily ran into the kitchen where Ethan was making pancakes. "Daddy, Daddy, the sunflowers are taller than me." He looked out the window at the garden she'd planted, at the flowers that reached toward the sky like prayers made manifest. "Just like you wanted," he said. "Just like Mommy would have wanted," she corrected. "Yeah, just like that." Doc Henderson stopped by later that afternoon. He'd become a regular visitor, the old veterinarian who'd helped them through those first difficult months. He brought his dog, a German shepherd named Scout who'd taken a shine to Lily and vice versa. "How's retirement treating you?" Henderson asked as they sat on the porch, watching Lily and Scout play in the yard. "Can't complain," Ethan said. "Quiet life suits me. Think you'll stay?" "Long term, I mean?" Ethan considered the question. He'd had offers. Military contractors looking for experienced soldiers. Security firms in big cities. Good money, steady work, the kind of life he'd once thought he wanted. "This is where I belong," he said. Henderson nodded. "Land gets in your blood out here. Makes it hard to leave." "It's not the land," Ethan said, watching Lily chase the dog around the yard. "It's what grows in it." 5 years have passed now since Ethan Callahan bought 40 acres of Montana scrubland for $1 and found more than he'd bargained for. Lily's 11 now, tall for her age, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's stubborn streak. She raises 4-H calves and knows the names of every star in the Big Dipper. She still sleeps with that old music box, though it only plays half a song now. The ranch prospers. Ethan runs a small herd of cattle and leases pasture to neighboring ranchers. He's learned that farming is just another kind of war, fought against weather and markets and his own limitations. But it's a war worth fighting, a war with purpose beyond mere survival. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work is done and Lily's doing homework at the kitchen table, Ethan thinks about the chain of events that brought them together. Caroline's death, Mara's greed, the dollar auction that seemed too good to be true. He wonders sometimes if Caroline somehow orchestrated it all from beyond the grave. If she knew somehow that he'd see that auction notice, that he'd be drawn to this place, that he'd find what he'd lost without ever knowing he'd lost it. But then Lily will ask him to check her math homework, or Scout will bark at something in the yard, and he'll stop wondering about fate and start appreciating what he has. On the wall above the fireplace hangs a photo from last Christmas. Ethan and Lily standing in front of the Christmas tree they'd cut from their own land. She's grinning, gap-toothed, and happy. He's smiling too, but it's his eyes that tell the real story. They're not the eyes of a soldier anymore. They're not the eyes of a man at war. They're the eyes of a father. A man who's found his way home. Next to that photo is another one. Caroline and Ethan from 5 years before Lily was born, young and in love and unaware of the trials that lay ahead. But if you look closely, you can see something in Caroline's eyes. Hope, maybe. Or faith. The kind that believes, despite all evidence to the contrary, that love finds a way. The county put a new sign up at the end of their road last year. Callahan Ranch, established 1885, restored 2019. Lily picked out the wording herself. "Why?" "Restored?" Ethan had asked. "Because that's what we did, Daddy. We fixed something that was broken." She was right, of course. She usually was. The ranch is whole now. The family is whole now. The circle that had been broken by war and distance and death has been closed again by love and stubbornness, and the kind of luck that feels too good to be real, but is real anyway. Ethan learned something in that first year with Lily that all his military training had never taught him. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with presence, with showing up, with staying put when everything in you wants to run. Sometimes coming home isn't about returning to a place you've been. Sometimes it's about finding a place you never knew existed. So that's the story of how a soldier bought an abandoned ranch for $1 and found a daughter he never knew he had. How a little girl waited in the dark for a father she'd never met, but always believed would come. How love, like water, finds its way around every obstacle and eventually reaches the sea. They're still there. Ethan and Lily Callahan on their 40 acres of Montana grass, still building something lasting, still growing something beautiful, still proving, one day at a time, that some things in this world are worth fighting for. And if you ever find yourself driving through that part of Montana on a summer evening when the light slants golden across the prairie, you might see them. A man and his daughter working in their garden as the sun sets behind the mountains. You might hear laughter carried on the wind, or the distant sound of a music box playing a half-remembered lullaby. You might wonder about their story, about how they came to be there, in that place at that time, living that life. Now you know, but life, as you well know, ain't content to leave well enough alone. Just when you think you've got your story figured out, it throws you a curveball. That changes everything you thought you knew. It was on Lily's 12th birthday, 3 years after the trial, when the past came knocking again. Ethan was in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal, when he heard tires on gravel. Through the barn door, he watched a government sedan pull up to the house. 2 people got out. A man in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and a woman with the kind of bearing that screamed federal authority. Lily was in the house wrapping presents for her own party later that afternoon. Her friends from school were coming over, along with Doc Henderson and Sheriff Bradley and the other folks who'd become family over the years. It was supposed to be a good day, a celebration. The woman knocked on the front door like she was serving a warrant. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over, dread settling in his stomach like cold stones. "Mr. Callahan?" The woman held up a badge. "I'm Agent Sarah Chun, FBI. This is Agent Marcus Webb. We'd like to ask you some questions about your time in Afghanistan." Afghanistan. The war he'd thought was behind him, buried under 3 years of peaceful ranch life and bedtime stories and parent-teacher conferences. "What kind of questions?" "The kind best discussed in private," Agent Webb said, glancing toward the house where Lily's laughter could be heard through an open window. They sat on the front porch, these 2 agents with their serious faces and their serious questions. Agent Chun opened a file thick enough to choke a horse. "Staff Sergeant Callahan, you served with Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. 3rd Deployment, Forward Operating Base Courage, Kunar Province." "That's right. You were there during Operation Thunderbolt." August 15, 2018. Ethan's blood went cold. Operation Thunderbolt. The mission that still woke him up some nights, sweating and shaking and reaching for weapons that weren't there. "I was there. What can you tell us about that operation?" "It's classified." Agent Webb leaned forward. "Not anymore, it isn't. 3 weeks ago, a video surfaced on social media. Footage from that day. Someone recorded what happened in that compound." The world tilted sideways. Ethan gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. "What video?" Agent Chun slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was grainy footage, the kind you get from a cell phone held by shaking hands. But it was clear enough. Clear enough to see Ethan and his squad moving through a compound in broad daylight. Clear enough to see the firefight that erupted when they were ambushed. Clear enough to see what happened after. "The official report says you encountered enemy combatants," Agent Chun said. "That force was used in defense of your unit." Ethan watched himself on that small screen, watched the worst day of his life play out in digital silence. Watched himself make the choice that had haunted him for 4 years. "That's what happened, is it?" Agent Webb paused the video at a crucial moment. "Because what this shows looks like an execution." The door to the house opened and Lily stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing the new dress Ethan had bought her for her birthday, blue as her eyes, with her hair braided the way Caroline used to wear hers. "Daddy," Mrs. Patterson called. She wanted to know if she should bring the cake early, or... She stopped when she saw the agents, saw their serious faces, saw the tablet with the frozen image of her father in combat gear. "Lily, go back inside, sweetheart. I'll be in a minute." "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just some old army business." She looked at him with those eyes that were too smart for her own good, nodded, and went back inside. But Ethan caught her shadow in the window, listening. "Agent Chun," Ethan said quietly, "whatever you think you know about that day, you weren't there. You didn't see what led up to that moment." "Then tell us." So he did. For the first time in 4 years, Ethan. Callahan told the truth about Operation Thunderbolt. We were hunting a bomb maker, Halil Massoud. High-value target. Intelligence said he was holed up in that compound with his family. Our orders were to capture or kill. The agents listened without interruption as Ethan described the approach, the entry, the systematic search of the compound. How they'd found Massoud in a back room with what looked like a vest full of explosives. He had his hands up, Ethan continued. Was saying something in Pashto. My interpreter, Ahmad, was translating. Said Massoud wanted to surrender. So what happened? Ahmad got shot. Sniper from the next building over. Went down hard, bleeding out fast. And while I was trying to stop the bleeding, trying to save him, Massoud reached for something under his shirt. Ethan closed his eyes, remembering. Ahmad's blood on his hands. The sound of gunfire outside. Massoud's eyes wild with fear or fanaticism or both. I thought it was a detonator. Thought he was going to blow us all to hell, so I ... So you shot him? I shot him 3 times, center mass, and then? Then I found out what he'd been reaching for. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. A photograph of his daughter. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Agent Chun made a note in her file. The video shows you standing over the body for several minutes. I was looking at that picture. At that little girl who looked just like... Ethan glanced toward the window where Lily's shadow still waited. Just like someone I used to know. "Mr. Callahan," Agent Webb said, "there are questions about whether proper rules of engagement were followed. Whether an unarmed man was killed. In cold blood. Unarmed?" Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. "Agent Webb, that man had enough C4 strapped to his chest to level a city block. The vest wasn't a fake. It was real. It just wasn't armed yet." "Can you prove that?" "Ahmad could have. If he hadn't died trying to save my ass." The agents exchanged glances. Chun closed her file. "Mr. Callahan, there's going to be an investigation. Possibly charges. You should retain counsel." "Charges for?" "What?" "War crimes, murder, violation of the Geneva Convention." The words hit Ethan like mortar rounds. War crimes, murder, the kind of charges that meant prison. The kind that meant losing everything he'd built, everything he'd found. "How long do I have?" "The investigation starts Monday. You'll be contacted." They left him sitting on his front porch, staring out at the land that had become his sanctuary. Behind him, he could hear Lily moving around in the kitchen, humming while she set up for her party. The sound that had become the soundtrack to his happiness. That night, after the birthday party was over and the guests had gone home and Lily was asleep with her new books piled beside her bed, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and tried to figure out how to tell his daughter that her father might be going to prison. He could run. Take Lily and disappear into the vastness of Montana or Wyoming or Colorado. Change their names, start over somewhere new. He had the skills, the knowledge, the desperation, but running would mean giving up the ranch, giving up the life they'd built, giving up the legal protections that kept Lily safe and Ethan her rightful guardian. Running would mean becoming the kind of man who breaks promises to little girls. The next morning, over pancakes that neither of them seemed to have much appetite. For Lily asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, are you in trouble?" Ethan set down his fork. Looked at his daughter across the table that he'd built with his own hands in the kitchen they'd painted together last spring. "Yeah, baby, I might be." "Because of the war?" "Because of something that happened in the war, something I did." Lily considered this with the seriousness that had been forced on her too early by circumstances beyond her control. Was it a bad thing? "I thought I was protecting my soldiers." But someone else thinks I was being bad. Do you think you were being bad? It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked him. I don't know, Lily. I really don't know. She reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers. I know, she said. You're not bad, Daddy. You're good. Sometimes good people have to do hard things. 3 weeks later, Ethan Callahan sat in a federal courthouse in Billings, Montana, wearing the same suit he'd worn to Caroline's funeral. Beside him sat his attorney, a former JAG officer named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in military criminal defense. Across the aisle sat 2 federal prosecutors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be a formality. Review the evidence, set a trial date, determine bail. But nothing about this case was formal. The prosecutor, a thin man named Davidson with the demeanor of an undertaker, stood to address the judge. Your Honor, the defendant stands accused of killing an unarmed civilian during a military operation in Afghanistan. Video evidence clearly shows. Your Honor, Torres interrupted. I object to the characterization of the victim as unarmed. Mr. Massoud was wearing an explosive vest containing enough C4 to kill everyone in that building. The vest wasn't armed. Davidson countered. My client had no way of knowing that at the time. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no patience for theatrics, held up her hand. Counselors, I've reviewed the evidence. I've watched the video. I've read the classified reports from that operation. What I see is a soldier making a split-second decision in a combat situation, while his interpreter was bleeding to death beside him. Davidson tried again. Your Honor, regardless of the circumstances, Mr. Davidson, let me ask you something. Have you ever been shot at? I'm sorry? Have you ever been in a situation where someone else's decision to pull a trigger determined whether you lived or died? No, Your Honor, but then sit down and let me do my job. Judge Hawkins turned to Ethan. Mr. Callahan, please stand. Ethan rose, his heart hammering against his ribs. I've been a federal judge for 23 years, Hawkins said. I've seen real war crimes. I've sentenced men who tortured prisoners, who killed civilians for sport, who violated every principle of military honor. You, sir, are not one of those men. Davidson shot to his feet. Your Honor, with respect. Sit down, Mr. Davidson. I'm dismissing these charges. The courtroom erupted. In the gallery, Ethan could see Lily sitting with Doc Henderson, her face shining with relief. He could see Sheriff Bradley nodding approvingly. He could see Rebecca Torres trying not to smile. The evidence shows that Staff Sergeant Callahan acted in accordance with his training and his best judgment under extremely difficult circumstances. Judge Hawkins continued. To criminalize split-second decisions made by soldiers in combat would be to criminalize war itself. And whatever my personal feelings about war might be, that's not my job. She banged her gavel. Case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun painted the mountains gold. Lily ran to Ethan and threw her arms around his waist, holding him like she was afraid he might disappear. I told you you weren't bad, she said into his shirt. Yeah, you did. Doc Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. Hell of a thing, son. Hell of a thing. That night, back at the ranch, Ethan sat on the front porch with a beer and watched the stars come out. He thought about Khalil Massoud, about the photograph of a little girl that had been clutched in a dead man's hand. He thought about the war, about the things he'd done and seen and lived through. He thought about forgiveness, about whether it was something you earned or something you were given, about whether he deserved the life he had or whether he was just lucky enough to have found it. Lily came out and sat beside him, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Daddy? Yeah? Do you ever think about the man you had to shoot? Trust Lily too. Cut right to the heart of things. Every day. Do you think he was a daddy too? Yeah, I think he probably was. That makes it sadder. It does. They sat in silence for a while, father and daughter, looking up at stars that had shone down on warriors and peacemakers, on the guilty and the innocent, on all the complicated people who fell somewhere in between. Yeah? I'm glad you came home. Me too, baby. Me too. The years that followed were quiet ones, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the steady accumulation of small joys. Lily grew from a girl into a young woman, tall and strong and smart enough to worry her father. On a regular basis. She won blue ribbons at the county fair for her cattle, scholarships for her academic achievements, and the kind of respect from her peers that comes from being genuinely kind. She also inherited her father's stubborn streak and her mother's fierce sense of justice. When she was 16, she came home from school with a black eye and bloody knuckles, leading a smaller boy by the hand. "Daddy," she announced, "this is Tommy Whitehorse." Some kids were picking on him because he's Native American. I explained to them that wasn't acceptable behavior. Ethan looked at his daughter's bruised face, at the defiant set of her jaw, at the way she was protecting the smaller boy. "I see. And how exactly did you explain this?" "With my fists mostly." Ethan tried to look stern, failed completely. "Lily, violence isn't the answer to everything. It was the answer to this." Tommy Whitehorse looked up at Ethan with eyes that reminded him of another child, in another time, in need of protection. "Sir," Tommy said quietly, "she didn't have to help me." "But she did anyway. That's what good people do," Lily said. "They help when help is needed." That night, after Tommy's parents had picked him up with profuse thanks and promises to have their families over for dinner, Ethan sat Lily down for a talk. "I'm proud of you," he said, "but I'm also worried about you. You can't fight every battle for everyone." "Why not?" "Because you'll get hurt. Because the world is bigger than you are. Because sometimes the fights are too big for one person." Lily considered this. "Is that why you stopped being a soldier? Because the fights were too big?" "I stopped being a soldier because I found something worth staying home for. Me. You." She smiled then, the kind of smile that reminded him so much of Carolyn. It took his breath away. "Well," she said, "now Tommy has something worth staying safe for too." "What's that?" "A friend who won't let him get hurt." At 17, Lily announced she wanted to join the military after high school. Not as a soldier, she was quick to clarify, as a medic. She wanted to help people, she said. She wanted to save lives instead of taking them. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Lily, no." "Why not?" "Because I know what war does to people. I know what it takes from you and what it leaves behind." "You served. You turned out okay. Did I?" The question hung between them like smoke from a campfire. "Yes," Lily said firmly. "You did. You came home. You saved me. You built this." She gestured around them, at the ranch, at the life they'd created. "If that's not turning out okay, then I don't know what is." That night, Ethan called his old squad leader, a man named Frank Morrison who'd retired from the Army and now ran a security consulting firm in Denver. "Frank, she wants to enlist. Smart girl. Military could use more people like her. I don't want her to go through what I went through. Ethan, you can't protect her from everything. Hell, you can't protect her from anything, really. All you can do is trust that you raised her right and hope she makes good choices. What if she doesn't come back? What if she does? What if she comes back stronger, smarter, more capable of handling whatever life throws at her? What if she saves lives that wouldn't otherwise be saved?" Frank paused. "What if you're so busy protecting her from becoming you that you forget to let her become herself?" 6 months later, Ethan stood in the parking lot of the military entrance processing station in Butte, Montana, watching his daughter disappear through doors that would change her life forever. She'd chosen the Army National Guard, medical specialist training, with a commitment to serve 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. a compromise between her need to serve and his need to keep her close. She turned at the door and waved, looking so much like Carolyn that Ethan's heart stuttered in his chest. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby." And then she was gone, swallowed up by the machinery of military processing. And Ethan was alone in a parking lot, crying like he hadn't cried since the day he'd found her in that empty house. 3 months later, she graduated from basic training. Ethan watched her march across the parade field in her dress blues, watched her receive her promotion to private first class, watched her transform from his little girl into something else. Something harder. Something more complete. At the graduation ceremony, she found him in the crowd of families and friends. "So?" she asked. "What do you think?" He looked at her. Really looked. At the way she carried herself now, with confidence and purpose. At the way she'd learned to be strong without losing her kindness. At the way she'd managed to become everything he'd hoped she could be, while remaining everything he loved about who she was. "I think," he said, "your mother would be proud." "What about you?" "I've been proud of you since the day I found you. This just gives me new reasons." That was 2 years ago. Now Lily is 19, home between college semesters and guard duty, helping him run the ranch that has grown from 40 acres to nearly 200. She studies pre-med at Montana State, carries a 4.0 GPA, and has been accepted to medical school with full military scholarship. She also has a boyfriend, a young man named David Chun, whose father happens to be Agent Chun's brother. Small world. Montana. David is studying agriculture, planning to take over his family's wheat farm north of Great Falls. He's a good kid, respectful and hardworking, and he looks at Lily the way Ethan once looked at Carolyn, like she hung the moon and painted the stars out last week. They were all sitting around the dinner table when David cleared his throat and got that particular look on his face that means a young man is about to say something that will change everything. "Mr. Callahan," he said formally, "I'd like to ask your permission to marry your daughter." Lily nearly choked on her mashed potatoes. "David, I'm doing this right," he said. "Your dad deserves to be asked properly." Ethan set down his fork and studied the young man across from him. Saw the nervousness in his eyes, the genuine love for his daughter, the kind of character that meant he'd spend the rest of his life trying to deserve her. "She's 19, son." "Yes, sir." "She's got medical school ahead of her, military commitment, a whole life to build." "Yes, sir. I want to build it with her. And if I say no?" David swallowed hard. "Then I'd wait. As long as it took." Ethan looked at Lily, who was staring at David with an expression of pure amazement. "What do you think, baby girl? You want to marry this knucklehead?" "Eventually," she said, grinning. "When we're both ready." "Then you have my blessing," Ethan said. "But no wedding until after medical school." "Deal," David said, relief flooding his face. "And no grandchildren until you can afford them." "Dad," Lily protested. "What? I'm just being practical." That night, after David had gone home and Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat on his front porch and thought about the passage of time. About little girls who grow up to be strong women. About soldiers who come home to find purposes they never knew they were looking for. About the strange arithmetic of love, where 1 + 1 sometimes equals everything. Doc Henderson stopped by the next morning, as had become his habit. The old veterinarian was slowing down these days, spending more time visiting friends and less time wrestling with difficult animals. "Heard there was some excitement here last night," he said, settling into his usual chair on the porch. "David proposed, or asked permission to propose. Something like that. Good boy, that David. Reminds me of someone I used to know." "Yeah? Who's that?" "Young soldier who showed up here 8 years ago with more heart than sense, and a little girl who needed saving." Ethan smiled. "That soldier's gotten older. Wiser too, I'd say." "You've done good, Ethan. With the ranch, with Lily, with yourself. Caroline would be proud. They sat in comfortable silence, two old friends watching the sun climb over mountains that had stood unchanged while their lives transformed completely. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't seen that auction notice? Henderson asked. Every day. And I figure some things are just meant to be. Some roads lead where they're supposed to, even when you can't see the destination. That's a hell of a thing to believe. It's the only thing I can believe. Henderson nodded. Faith's a funny thing. Sometimes it finds you when you're not even looking for it. That afternoon, Ethan was fixing fence on the north pasture when Lily came riding out on her horse, a Mari named Sunshine that she'd trained. Herself, she'd been quiet since David's proposal, thoughtful in the way she got when big changes were coming. Daddy, she said, dismounting and helping him with the wire, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Mommy had told you about me from the beginning? Ethan straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. It was a question he'd asked himself 1,000 times. I used to. Spent a lot of nights wondering about the first steps I missed, the first words, all those milestones that happened without me. And now I think maybe it happened the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe I needed to be the kind of man who was ready to be your father. Maybe you needed to be old enough to choose me back. Lily smiled. You think I chose you? I know you did. That first day, when the sheriff wanted to take you away, you could have gone. Could have made it easy on everyone. But you didn't, because I knew you were my daddy. How? The same way you knew I was your daughter. Some things don't need proof. They worked together in comfortable silence, repairing fence that would keep their cattle safe, their property secure, their life contained and protected. Father and daughter, building something that would last. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they packed up their tools and headed home. Home to the ranch that had started as 40 acres of scrubland and had grown into something beautiful. Home to the house that had once held only ghosts and now overflowed with life. Home to the family that had been broken and scattered in somehow, against all odds, made whole again. That night, as Ethan tucked his tools away in the barn, he found himself thinking about the long chain of events that had brought him to this moment. The war that had taken him away from Caroline. Caroline's death that had orphaned Lily. Mara's greed that had nearly destroyed them both. The dollar auction that had seemed too good to be true, but had delivered more than he'd ever dared to dream. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important battles aren't the ones you choose. They're the ones that choose you. The ones that find you when you're looking for something else entirely and transform you into the person you were always meant to become. He was a father now, had been for 8 years. But more than that, he was Lily's father. The man who'd been trusted with raising Caroline's daughter, with protecting her heart, with helping her become the woman she was meant to be. It was, he realized, the most important mission he'd ever been given. The only one that really mattered. And unlike his missions in Afghanistan, this one had a happy ending. As he walked toward the house, he could see Lily through the kitchen window, making tea and probably reading one of her medical textbooks, planning her future, building her dreams, ready to go out into the world and save lives, the way she'd saved his. Sometimes the best things in life cost exactly $1. Sometimes they're worth everything you have to give. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they give you back more than you ever knew you needed. But I ain't done telling you about Ethan and Lily Callahan just yet. Because the thing about life is, it keeps happening even when you think the story's over. Even when you think you've found your happy ending, there's always another chapter waiting to be written. It was the spring of Lily's sophomore year in medical school when the phone call came. 3 a.m, the kind of call that never brings good news. Ethan rolled over in bed, fumbling for the receiver, his mind already racing through possibilities. Accident. Emergency. Bad news from far away. Mr. Callahan, this is Colonel Martinez, Fort Harrison. I'm calling about your daughter. Ethan's blood went cold. Lily was supposed to be at a guard training exercise, routine medical drills at the base in Helena. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that should result in middle-of-the-night phone calls from colonels. What happened? Sir, there's been an incident. During a night training exercise, one of our vehicles hit an IED simulation that malfunctioned. Real explosive instead of smoke charge. We have 3 injured soldiers, and your daughter. Well, she's the reason all 3 of them are still alive. Ethan sat up, fully awake now. Is she hurt? Concussion, some cuts from flying debris. But she refused medical attention until she'd treated the others. Saved a kid's life, Mr. Callahan. 19-year-old private who would have bled out if she hadn't been there. The drive to Fort Harrison took 2 hours through mountain roads that Ethan knew like the back of his hand. 2 hours to think about what Colonel Martinez had told him. About how Lily had crawled into a smoking vehicle to pull out the wounded. How she'd performed emergency surgery on the side of a training field with nothing but her field kit and her training. How she'd worked for 3 hours straight, covered in other people's blood, refusing to let anyone die on her watch, he found. Her in the base hospital, sitting beside the bed of the private she'd saved. The kid was maybe 19, all arms and legs and frightened eyes. Lily was holding his hand, talking to him in the gentle voice she'd inherited from her mother. Hey soldier, she was saying, you're going to be fine. The surgery went perfect. You'll be back on duty in 6 weeks. The kid looked up at her like she was an angel. Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. You don't thank me, Lily said. You go home to your family and you live a good life. That's thanks enough. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching his daughter comfort a wounded soldier, and felt something shift inside his chest. Pride, yes. But something deeper than pride, recognition. He was looking at the woman Lily was becoming, and she was magnificent. She looked up and saw him, her face lighting up despite the exhaustion and the bandage on her forehead. Daddy! She stood up carefully, wincing a little from her own injuries, and walked into his arms. He held her tight, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her against his chest. I'm okay, she whispered. I'm okay. I know you are, baby, I know. But as he held her, Ethan found himself thinking about another hospital room, in another time, where he'd held another soldier who'd been hurt in the line of duty. Ahmad, his interpreter, bleeding out on a hospital bed in Germany, while Ethan promised him he'd be fine. Promises he couldn't keep. The difference was that Lily had kept her promises, had saved the lives she'd sworn to save. On the drive home, with Lily dozing in the passenger seat despite her protests that she was fine. To drive herself, Ethan found himself remembering a conversation they'd had years earlier. About why she wanted to be a medic instead of a soldier. About saving lives instead of taking them. She'd kept that promise too. Daddy? Her voice was soft, half asleep. That boy, Private Morrison, he reminded me of Tommy. Tommy Whitehorse, the kid she'd defended in high school. The one who'd grown up to become a teacher on the reservation, who still sent Lily Christmas cards every year. Yeah? How so? Same look in his eyes. Like he couldn't believe someone cared enough to help him. Ethan glanced over at his daughter, at the woman who'd inherited Caroline's compassion and his own stubborn refusal to give up. Some people are worth helping, he said. All people are worth helping, she corrected. That's what Mommy used to say, Caroline. Even after all these years, her influence lived on in their daughter. Her kindness, her belief in the fundamental worth of every human being, her conviction that love was stronger than fear. The next morning, Ethan was mucking out stalls when Doc Henderson arrived with news that changed everything. Ethan, you need to see this. He was holding a newspaper, the Billings Gazette. folded to an inside page. The headline read, "Local Soldier Saves Lives in Training Accident." Below, it was a photo of Lily in her uniform, receiving the commendation from Colonel Martinez. It wasn't the article that made Ethan's hands shake. It was the smaller story next to it. Afghanistan veteran honored for heroism, a photo he recognized. Halil Massoud, the bomb maker he'd killed 4 years earlier. But this wasn't a mugshot or a target photo. This was a family picture. Massoud, with his wife and 3 children, including the little girl whose photograph Ethan had found clutched in the dead man's hand. The article told a different story than the one Ethan had been carrying all these years. Massoud hadn't been a bomb maker. He'd been an interpreter, working with American forces. The explosive vest found in his compound hadn't been his. It had belonged to Taliban fighters who'd been using his family as human shields. Massoud had been trying to surrender when Ahmed was shot. Had been reaching for his identification papers when Ethan pulled the trigger. "Jesus," Ethan whispered. "There's more," Doc Henderson said quietly. "The reporter tracked down some of the other soldiers from your unit. They're saying the Army knew he was friendly, but the paperwork got mixed up. Wrong target, wrong intelligence." Ethan sat down hard on a hay bale, the newspaper crumpling in his hands. "All these years," he said. "All these years I've been telling myself I had no choice." "You didn't," Henderson said firmly. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had. That's all any of us can do. I killed an innocent man. You saved your squad. In a war that never should have happened, with intelligence that was wrong from the start." That evening, Ethan sat on his front porch and called Frank Morrison, his old squad leader. The man who'd become his closest friend, his brother in all the ways that mattered. "Frank, did you know about Massoud?" "Yeah, I knew." "Why didn't you tell me?" A long pause. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything. Because you were already carrying enough guilt for 10 men. Because the truth wouldn't have brought him back. His daughter, Frank, she was 6 years old. And our daughter is 21 and saving lives because her father came home from that war. You think Massoud would want you to destroy yourself over a mistake that wasn't even your mistake?" Ethan thought about the photograph he'd seen so many times in his nightmares. The little girl with dark eyes and a shy smile. "I need to find her." "Ethan, I need to find her, Frank. I need to know she's okay." It took 3 months and the help of a private investigator, but Ethan found her. Amira Massoud, now 16 years old, living in a refugee camp in Jordan with her mother and younger brothers. The investigator sent photos. A beautiful young woman with her father's eyes, studying to become a nurse despite having lost everything. Ethan stared at those photos for hours, thinking about another 16-year-old girl he'd known. One who'd defended smaller children from bullies. One who'd chosen to save lives instead of taking them. The package he sent contained medical textbooks, supplies for her studies, and a letter he rewrote 17 times before he got it right. "Dear Amira," it began, "you don't know me, but I knew your father. I was the soldier who killed him, and I want you to know that not a day passes that I don't think about him and about you. I know nothing I can say will bring him back or heal the pain I caused your family. But I want you to know that your father died trying to protect people he cared about. He was a good man who got caught in a bad situation. I wish I had been wise enough to see that before it was too late." The response came 6 weeks later. A letter written in careful English on paper that had been folded and refolded many times. "Mr. Callahan," it read, "thank you for your letter and for the books. I am studying to be a nurse so I can help people. Like my father tried to help. He always said that good people make mistakes, but bad people make excuses. You are not making excuses. That tells me you are good people. I forgive you. My father would want me to forgive you. He would want you to live a good life and be happy. Please do not carry sadness for him anymore." Ethan read that letter sitting. At his kitchen table while Lily made dinner, and for the second time in his adult life, he wept like a child. "Daddy?" Lily was beside him in an instant, her hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" He showed her the letter, watched her read it with the same careful attention she brought to her medical journals. "She sounds like an amazing young woman," Lily said finally. "She does, like someone else I know." That night, they sat on the front porch and talked until dawn about forgiveness and redemption and the strange ways that healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. About how the children of enemies can become allies, how the daughters of the dead can offer life to the living. "I want to help her," Ethan said. "Pay for her education, help her family." "Then we will," Lily said. Simply, that's what good people do. 3 years later, Ethan stood in the international arrivals terminal at Denver International Airport, holding a sign that read, "Masood Family." His hands were shaking, and his mouth was dry as desert sand. Amira Masood stepped through the gate, like a vision from another world. 19 now, wearing a hijab the color of sky, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd survived more than most people twice her age. Behind her came her mother and 2 younger brothers, all of them clutching documents and looking around with the wide-eyed wonder of people seeing America for the first time. Ethan had sponsored their refugee resettlement, had worked with immigration, lawyers and aid organizations for 2 years to bring them to Montana. They would live in a house he'd bought in town, and Amira would attend nursing school on a scholarship he'd established in her father's name. She recognized him immediately from the photos they'd exchanged over the years. "Mr. Ethan?" Her voice was soft, accented, careful. She stepped forward and, to his amazement, hugged him like he was family she hadn't seen in years. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing us home." Home. She called America home. This girl whose father he'd killed, whose family he'd destroyed, whose life he'd tried to rebuild from the ashes of his own guilt. "Welcome to Montana," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The integration wasn't easy. Language barriers, cultural differences, the constant struggle of starting over in a new country with nothing but hope and determination. But the people of Millfield, Montana, proved that small towns could have big hearts. Doc Henderson helped Amira's mother find work at the veterinary clinic. Sheriff Bradley's wife taught English classes. David Chun's family hired the boys to work on their farm, and Lily, brilliant, compassionate Lily, became the sister Amira had never had. They studied together. These 2 young women from different worlds, bound together by tragedy and hope. Lily taught Amira about American medical practices while Amira shared stories of traditional healing from her homeland. They practiced procedures on each other, quizzed each other for exams, dreamed together about the lives they would save. On graduation day, Ethan sat in the auditorium and watched both his daughters receive their nursing degrees. Lily with highest honors, headed for medical school in the fall. Amira with a perfect attendance record and a job waiting for her at the regional hospital. 2 young women who should have been enemies, united by their shared commitment to healing the wounds that war had left behind. After the ceremony, they all went back to the ranch for a celebration that lasted until midnight. Amira's family, the Chuns, Doc Henderson, Sheriff Bradley, and half the town of Millfield gathered on the same front porch where Ethan had once sat alone, wondering if he deserved the happiness he'd found. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Amira approached him with something in her hands. "Mr. Ethan," she said, "I have something for you." It was a photograph. Halil Masood, in his interpreter uniform, standing beside a young American soldier. The soldier was smiling, his arm around Masood's shoulder. They looked like friends, like brothers. "This was my father with Sergeant Williams," Amira said. "The medic from your unit. The one who tried to save him after what happened." Ethan stared at the photo. at Masood's face, alive and smiling, and human in a way that the intelligence photos had never captured. My father wrote about your unit in his letters, Amira continued. He said you were good soldiers. Brave soldiers. He said Sergeant Callahan saved his life twice before the day he died. What? The IED that killed 3 people in the market. You pushed him down, covered him with your body. And the sniper attack on the convoy. You gave him your helmet when his was damaged. Ethan's mind reeled. He'd saved Masood's life, had protected him, worked with him, trusted him. And then, in one moment of confusion and fear, had taken it all away. He knew you were a good man, Amira said quietly. Even at the end, he knew. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, Ethan found himself back on the front porch with his 2 daughters. Lily was planning her medical residency while Amira practiced English by reading American poetry aloud. 3 generations of war's children, he realized. Carolyn, who'd lost her fiancé to conflict and died before he could come home. Lily, who'd grown up without a father because of decisions made in distant deserts. Amira, whose father had died trying to help the very soldiers who'd failed to save him, and yet here they all were, alive, whole, building something beautiful from the ruins of what had been lost. You know, Lily said, looking up from her laptop, I've been thinking about specializing in trauma surgery. That's hard work, Ethan said. Dangerous work. Good work, Amira added. Important work. Like what you do, Daddy, Lily said. Taking care of things that are broken. Fixing them so they can grow again. Ethan looked out over his land, at the Keys. Pastures where cattle grazed peacefully under Montana stars. At the garden where Caroline's flowers bloomed year after year. At the barn where he'd first held his daughter and promised never to leave her again. Fixing things that are broken. Maybe that's what he'd been doing all along. Not just the ranch, not just the land, but the lives that had found their way to this place. His own included. Yeah, he said finally. I guess that's exactly what we do. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with open doors and patient hearts and the radical belief that yesterday's enemies can become tomorrow's family. Sometimes healing looks like a refugee girl and a soldier's daughter studying together by lamplight, determined to save lives that others have given up for lost. Sometimes redemption comes in the form of forgiveness offered by a child who has every reason to hate you and chooses love instead. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the story you thought was ending turns out to be just the beginning of something even more beautiful than you dared to imagine.